I've not done it before. My name is John Fleischman. I'm the publisher, I guess is a good word for it, here at SoDoesItMatter.com, my Substack on California politics. I've been having a fun time with it. We've started in April, and somehow I've managed to write almost 600 pieces of content for this Substack. I guess I'm either prolific or bored, one or the other. And as I always tell people, uh, I am biased and fair, if that's possible. That means that I have an opinion as a conservative, and I share that opinion. But you know what I don't do? I don't let my personal political philosophy keep me from being able to step back and realistically analyze the situation. I call balls and I call strikes, and so because of it, my friend list is very interesting. I have some people that 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 understand that sometimes if you are in the business of calling balls and strikes, that you may tell some people what they don't want to hear, and some of those people that hear what they don't want to hear then get mad at you. And for those people, I would just say take a Valium and just chill out, because not everything that happens goes the way you want it to. As a matter of fact, I would submit to you that if you're a conservative in California, most things don't go the way that you want them to. Anyways, for this first shot, I've got a little structure. I'm going to try to stick to it. We're going to try to do about a half hour of me kind of riffing here for a while. Obviously, if you're live, you can put something in the live chat if you want at your own risk, and I may or may not respond to it. And then we'll do some Q&A at the end. I don't even know how that works. If I guess Q&A in this instance is probably people asking questions on the live chat. If there's some mechanism to bring people watching in real time, I don't know about it, and I've never seen that happen. Anyways, I think I mentioned to all of you that we're gonna talk about some of the latest with Chad Bianco and something he said that came out today. We're going to talk about California 5 and what's potentially going on with Kiley and McClintock. We're going to talk about all of this flood of polling that keeps taking place in the California governor's race and a little bit of a take I have on that. We're going to talk about the all important upcoming early April California Republican Party convention and the insular endorsement process that is going to be taking place around that event. And then, if we have time, if I haven't filibustered too much, we're going to get into Matt Mahan, who is kind of trying to stake out his turf in the California governor's race as a Democrat who is willing to be fairly critical of Governor Newsom. So we'll talk about all that, and then we'll have our closing. So with that, I'm just going to jump into it, and we're going to start by talking about Chad Bianco. I put out something earlier today on Substack. Bianco, who, by the way, had previous to this point, had already been on video talking about the issue of illegal immigration. And frankly, what he had to say wasn't newsworthy because he really had taken the party line. He had has said a lot of strong words in the past against illegal immigration, especially focusing how unfair it is for people to come into the country illegally, jumping in line, as it were, or skipping the line in front of all the people that have waited legally. But then this morning, I actually had one of our readers, Nancy from the desert, send me, like, have you seen this on Breitbart? And I went over to the Breitbart News Network, and there was a big story there with a headline about Bianco coming out in support of amnesty for illegal immigrants. And then when I read through that post, they actually cited the podcasts where he said it, one of which I subscribe to, Britt Mayer's podcast. If you don't watch that, I would recommend that you watch it. Although if you're like me, there's a significant amount of Maha stuff that's on there talking to me about supplements and all this other stuff. I'm not healthy enough to really do all of that. So I don't really watch as much of that, but Britt's a tremendously good interviewer, and she has a lot of insightful guests on her show. In this particular instance, she had Sheriff Bianco on her show, and they talked about a lot of things. It was a wide-ranging interview. If you look on my feed, you'll see I embedded it into a post midday today. But towards the very end of it, Bianco, in fact, does come out and takes a position where he basically says that people who have lived here a long time, have had jobs, there should be a pathway to citizenship for those people. And he even goes so far as to say that as governor, he would kind of help negotiate with the president and I think Congress, or that's implied, to try to get a deal done. By the way, good luck. I've talked a lot about how there's incentives in place for the right and the left to never really solve this issue. My buddy Mike, I cite you, Mike, because if I feel like you're my spirit animal on this issue, not because we agree, but this is something that you really care about. That was Mike Madrid, one of my buddies for a long time. We share politics and Dodgers as a hobby. But anyways, and then he went on to talk about how definitely he would never want his agency, or presumably all local law enforcement agencies, to be enforcing immigration laws locally. And I think he, as I recall from this morning, he cites the example of he have somebody who's potentially a rape victim. He wouldn't want that person to not want to call the police and get help because he would be worried that that person would be fearful of getting kind of turned over to ICE and being deported simply for making that phone call. So I have a lot of personal opinions on this topic. You're not going to get those today because we're trying to rush through things. So instead, I'm just going to take a minute to say that I think that this is a fairly interesting and controversial position to take in what is a de facto GOP primary. You've got basically he and Steve Hilton are kind of locked in a fairly even spot. We'll talk about that more when I get to the polling topic later. But the two of them are kind of locked into a discussion, a debate, a competition to see who could be the top vote getter. I wrote earlier in the week about why I don't think both of them will get into the runoff. I do think at the end of the day, the public employee unions in California will tap one of these people and they'll start running contrast ads between their chosen Democrat that they want to see and the chosen Republican that they want to see. And that's not new. And that's a whole different analysis. But I do think that what's going to happen here is that Steve Hilton is going to really be trying to share this position that has been taken by his opponent to as many Republican primary voters as possible, because public opinion polling shows that that position is not, it's a very divisive one amongst Republicans. I think Democrats are probably pretty unified behind the position that he has, but Republicans are certainly fractured. And I would imagine that unless Hilton also shares that position and hasn't been talking about it, he's going to make a big deal out of it. And we're going to see what that does at the end of the day. There are 5 million plus Republicans in the state of California, more Republicans than in any other state in the country. And talking to all of those people is expensive. So, you know, we'll see what Hilton chooses to talk about. I guarantee you, knowing the very smart strategic people that are running the Bianco campaign, he's not going to be spending much more time talking about this. I don't know what I don't know, but I would actually be surprised if his campaign had really planned to talk about this at all. I think this is what happens when you get a very candid, freewheeling interview with a candidate. So that's what I'm going to kind of talk about relative to that topic today, but we're going to be following it. It's very interesting. I've now got a video clip of him, kind of his pre-announcement today or his pre-Brit show about what he was saying. So I'll probably run something else where I kind of have both videos side to side and people can decide which Chad Bianco it is. I've got my camera is on a gimbal. So if I do this or I do this, everything goes back and forth. And I'm going to give everyone a headache. I'm going to try to put my logo right in the middle. There we go. Okay. Next topic, Kiley and McClintock. I haven't seen a lot of reporting on it, but the reality is just a few weeks ago, the rumors started to come out that Kevin Kiley, congressman from east of Sacramento and all the way down the eastern side of the Sierras, has been seriously looking at running in District 5. I think the most important thing to kind of frame at the beginning is that when these districts were drawn, by the way, I think the guy that helped with the map drawing might be with us, so he can boast over his work. But he took the seat that Kiley's in now, and he blew it up in the maps that he drew. And obviously maps that were confirmed by the Democrats in the legislature and approved by a healthy majority of California voters. Kevin Kiley's district is gone, and it was divided up into 6 different districts. And I think that a few of those districts are like literally need not apply for Kiley. These are districts that are so blue that the Democrat would win in a general election if the Republican opponent passed away. That kind of blue. Maybe there's a seat or two that are pretty that he can make or try to make competitive, but kind of in the you've got a chance to win seat, not it's really super competitive seats. These are tough seats. And then there's one district, District 5, where Kiley represents about 4.5%, I think. It's right in there of that current district, but it's the district that Congressman Tom McClintock below him, if you're looking at a map. This is a seat that's like, think of it as the east side, west side of the Sierra, northern end of the Sierras, going into up into Yosemite and Sequoia and that area. Tom McClintock has represented roughly 3/4, right around there, of that district since the last redistricting, and so he's already declared for that seat. He's running for that seat, and so I think that it's going to be a bit challenging for Kiley to run for it, but If you're Kevin Kiley, you might say to yourself, hey, it's a free country. I can run for that seat. And it's not like Tom McClintock lives in that seat either, because Tom does not live in that seat. For those of you who don't know, the Constitution requires that you live in the state in which you run for Congress, but not in the district in which you run. So McClintock lives much closer in and maybe in the suburbs of Sacramento. I'm sure he spends a lot of time in his district. I know he does, but we'll see what happens. I think that to a certain extent, Tom, for those of you who don't know him well, Tom's favorite art of politics is not fundraising. That's not what he loves about politics. Maybe I should phrase it this way. I'm not sure anybody loves it. He loves it and he does not love it and does not do it. So he went into the new year showing a pretty low cash on hand total. And I think in doing that kind of sets up a scenario where Kylie goes, maybe I run there. I certainly am a better fundraiser than McClintock. That having been said, since the rumors started to float, McClintock's operation has gotten pretty active. I know for a fact that he's pulling in a bunch of money now. None of that gets publicly reported yet. And then also, three other things have happened that I think are worth mentioning. Number one is that President Trump endorsed Tom's reelection last week on Truth Social. And that's not particularly helpful if you were running for statewide office, but it is particularly helpful if you're running for a heavily red Republican district. Trump's numbers with Republicans have fallen a bit this year lately. But when I say a bit, that's like going from like in the high 90% approvals to like 90 or the high 80s. Still very strong approval from Republicans for the president. The second thing that happened is the California Republican Party endorsed McClintock earlier in the week, I think earlier in the week or late last week, I think earlier this week. And that was a very overwhelming vote of the board. Although I found it kind of interesting, one of the votes on the board was the representative for the Assembly Republican leader, Heath Flora, and Flora's representative on that call did not vote to endorse Tom McClintock, which may or may not have been a proximate cause for Tom McClintock turning around and endorsing Assemblyman Flora's Republican primary opponent, which that's when I found out he had a Republican primary opponent. So that happened. And then the third piece that dropped, and by the way, in order for the state Republican Party to endorse, there's a big threshold of county Republican parties that have to endorse you as well. So Tom's got a lot of support around that district. And then last but not least, just today, the Club for Growth endorsed Tom in his reelection. And for those of you who are not really familiar with the club, they are after you put aside the Republican Leadership Fund and after you put aside the speaker's personal kind of fundraising PAC, the third largest PAC that plays in congressional races is the Club for Growth. They're a huge financial player, and they have a strong reputation for wanting to play in safe Republican seats. They're a very conservative organization that wants to make sure that very conservative people represent red districts. They also want to make sure that conservatives represent all districts, but they are particularly focused on those. And then when they endorse an incumbent for reelection, that matters. I will finish up by saying on this topic that all of this is particularly relevant because all of these endorsements have occurred as a result of Kiley's making noises that he wants to run. And it's more than noises. Kiley, who, by the way, Kevin's a personal friend. I like him a lot. I do not think he should run for this seat. I don't think it's good for the party. I don't think it's good for him. But he's got to make his own decisions about what he wants to do. Nobody owns a seat in Congress, so it's certainly his prerogative to run. I just don't think he'll be successful if he runs. That having been said, I do think that it'll be interesting to see what happens and whether he actually runs. And if he does, I think there'll be a lot of Democrats who are looking at this and just going, this is just great. And it'll be the second Paul Mitchell designed terror story for Republicans as Young Kim and Ken Calvert, two incumbent Republicans, are battling it out in eastern Orange County and western Riverside County. With that, we're going to move on and we're going to talk about what I wanted to talk about relative to gubernatorial polling. And I'm sure everyone has been treated to this. There are like a bunch of different groups that are constantly polling the California's governor's race, public polling, and then all of the candidates are doing private polling and releasing their polling. And it's enough to give you a headache. If you add to it, and I don't know if this is happening on the Democrat side of the aisle with Democrats, but on the Republican side, every time there's a new poll, either Hilton feels like it was good for him, or Bianco thinks it was good for him, or in one case, a candidate released poll by John Slavitt, who's a lesser known Republican candidate. Great guy, self-styled moderate. I don't know if there's much of a lane for moderates in either party at this particular time in politics, but That's a whole other story. But anyways, every time one of these polls comes out, you're getting another direct fundraising pitch, another social media vault coming out saying why this poll was good for their candidates, and they're not very sophisticated. It's just now I'm up. So the latest example would be Emerson College, where I don't even know where that is. They're somewhere not in California, but they put out their latest, and they have now Hilton at 17%, and then when you round it off, Bianco and then Congressman Swalwell on the Democrat side is at 14%, and then it kind of falls off from there. Again, I wrote an entire column, which you can go find on my Substack, about why I don't think you're going to have two Republicans in the runoff. Even no matter how much you play around with Paul Mitchell's little program that he wrote, where you could try to figure it out for yourself, it doesn't really compute all the union money that's going to come in at the end. Although I like the program, and so I think that these things are just going to keep flipping around and driving everybody nuts. And I don't think they're really going to tell the story, because the story is going to be told after voter contact really starts. Maybe the only story that you can tell is that Tom Steyer, the billionaire, is following in the same path that he created when he ran for president, because we can tell that he has dumped a crap ton of money in already, tens of millions of dollars, and hasn't moved at all. So I don't think the voters are really selling buying what he's selling. But other than that, all of these other candidates, they're all in fundraising mode. None of them are in fund spending mode, which does matter when you talk about the money. And I will say on the Emerson survey, because this is important, those people who are really into this stuff, like I am, you go in and you look at the actual verbatims of what's being asked. And I think it's pretty significant that Emerson left off ballot designation. And I think that if you want to actually have a much more cohesive understanding about why Hilton bumped up relative to Bianco, some of that may be because Bianco, I think, has an extraordinarily strong ballot title as Riverside County Sheriff for a statewide race. And not having that ballot title read to people when on other surveys it has been read is going to significantly impact the numbers that he gets. So, anyways, mainly I wanted to use this as an opportunity to tell you how much it bothers me, all of these surveys constantly coming out, and I think they have very little impact other than, like I said, to be fodder for blogs, for social media, and of course, every newspaper is writing a story about it every week. So I'm going to move on to my next item, which is the California Republican Party convention that is coming up. These conventions are not what they used to be. Once upon a time, I recall when these conventions had thousands of activists going to them. The number has diminished. To be honest with you, my personal take is that over a extended period of time, you've had party leadership, and I'm not making personally disparaging remarks about party leadership, although maybe I will, I'm live, so I could be goaded into it. You guys can goad me on the chat. But I would say that I don't think there's been as much grassroots focus from the party as there has been in previous years. And to be fair, the longer the state of California moves down the path of being blue and Republicans having no statewide Republican office holders, with the shrinking percentage of elected Republicans in the caucuses, fundraising gets harder and harder. You can look to Hawaii. You can look to Massachusetts. Did you know that Massachusetts used to be majority Republican back in the day? And so I've spent some time studying what's happened there. And frankly, Republicans have not hit rock bottom in California yet. There's a point at which everything's just gone, because at some point the atrophy just keeps going and getting worse. So if Republicans don't flip it around at some point here in the very near future, there may be nothing left to flip. But anyways, at the convention, they're going to be doing endorsements, or there's a process for candidates to get endorsed. And I don't know if it's kind of a weird, if allegory is the right word, about what's going on in the state, but Republicans gathering, maybe 1,000 Republican delegates with proxies, maybe it's only 700 or 800 that show up at a convention hotel. In this time, it's in San Diego in early April. And if 2/3 of the delegates that are, I think it's 2/3, decide to endorse a candidate, then that candidate has the party's endorsement. Okay, so what does that mean when you have the California Republican Party's endorsement? So back in the day, like, I was executive director of the party a quarter century ago. That's a long time. And back in those days, there were ballot measures that appeared on the June ballot. And because there were measures that appeared on the June ballot, you raised money, and it got money from ballot measures that wanted, or opposition to ballot measures that wanted to have the Republican Party communicate to Republican voters where the party stood on ballot measures. And so I recall when we did that, we had a whole host of mailings that went out, maybe 4 statewide mailings that went out. But that gave us an opportunity to put on that mail, by the way, here's your California Republican Party voter guide. And so Republican voters had a clear understanding of who had been endorsed by the party. Now there are no measures on the June ballot, or the legislature puts some on, but you don't hit the critical mass that would cause you to be able to put out mailings like you do in November. So the real question is, it's kind of like if the tree falls in the forest and nobody's there, did it make a noise? What do you do with a California Republican Party convention that takes, an endorsement at a convention in the middle of, nowhere? Because there's another factor that's happened. This convention has been placed so late in April that the deadline for having party endorsements listed in the Secretary of State's pamphlet, or it's really a book that comes out, will have passed by. So if let's just say, for example, you're Gloria Romero. Sorry, I'm conflating my people. But if Gloria gets endorsed at the convention, the list of endorsed candidates will not include her, let alone all the other races. I just picked her as an example. So I say all of that to say, is it really worth it? Because think about what needs to happen over the next 2 months, right? You're going to have Republican candidates that should be traveling the state, barnstorming, earning earned media wherever they go, trying to raise money wherever they go, trying to see as many community leaders and party leaders as possible to spread their message. And instead, what are they going to be doing? Focused in on a list of 1,400, of the solidest, most loyal Republicans in the state, trying to bring their message to them, hoping that when they go to the convention that they will get an endorsement. And I just submit to you that it may not be worth it. As a matter of fact, the only place where I think it's worth it would be in the governor's primary, as it were. I call it a primary. It's not really, but if between Hilton and Bianco, if one of them could actually get the endorsement, it would matter because those are the only 2 Republicans running statewide who have enough money that they're going to be talking to Republican voters. That's useful, I think, to let Republican voters know you have the endorsement of the Republican Party. But there's nobody else running as a Republican statewide who's really amassing a big enough war chest to meaningfully communicate with 5 million Republican voters in California, or the subset of them that are going to be the most likely to vote. So I say all of that because at some level, it's an allegory for what Republicans have going wrong in California. We even have our own process to make sure that all of our candidates are focused inwards instead of focusing out. And it's really unfortunate. I literally, the messaging that I'm getting in my email box from candidates is, it's less about why I should be in office and more about, here's the intricate way that you can log into the system and and participate. And James, there is a Republican Party in California, but it's tough. But remember, there are more Republicans in California than there are in any other state, and we're just kind of landlocked. And I've written about it, and we'll talk about it more, that this migration that's happening around the country is going to make the situation more extreme. You're going to see more Democrats landlocked in states that are Republican, and more Republicans landlocked in states that are Democrat. The great sort, as you might want to call it. Anyways, the last thing that I wanted to talk about was about Matt Mahan and how he's positioning himself. This is the mayor of San Jose, who has had no problems being critical about kind of Gavin Newsom's performativeness and lack of serious addressing, an effective, maybe I should say effective addressing of issues. And what I want to do is go through and maybe talk about, whether Matt Mahan is really very moderate. Is he moderate in temperament? What are his positions on the issues? I do think that there are plenty of people who are like, hey, we're a blue state. The odds of electing a Republican governor are very small. Therefore, he sticks out as maybe the most reasonable Democrat of the bunch. Is he reasonable? I hate to do this to you guys, but we're at over 30 minutes now. So what I'm really doing is wetting your whistle for the next either call, or, you know what, I'll commit to doing an analysis of this. I'll do a piece on this soon where I kind of throw it out there. And then if we do more of these lives, we could talk about it. And I'll look forward to feedback from everybody if they think that me doing this live is a good idea or not. I don't know. But what I wanted to do was leave time for Q&A so that I could take some questions and answers. Although I guess if enough people ask us their question, what do you think of Matt Mahan? We can surrender time from the Q&A. But does anybody want to ask any questions of me as we're in that phase now? this is where you get to ask anything. If not, I'll talk about some other things, but kind of go for it. Mike, you got to lead the charge to get the ice flowing here. I don't have anybody asking me a question. All right. Well, then let's talk about Matt May. Oh, Chad Bianco. We talked about Chad Bianco amnesty, Rose. Were you not on the phone? I started with that item first. So the good news for you, Rose, is I'm going to send this around and you can watch what you missed. Mike Madrid wants to know who's going to play second base for the Dodgers. And so maybe we'll get in that. But actually, this is kind of fun. For those of you who haven't noticed, the California Post launched a little less than a month ago, and I have been writing about. I've been writing on there. They've invited me to write columns on there. I've had 5 already, but today was pretty cool for me because I've never written a column for call it a regular publication. I'm sure there's a debate about whether the New York Post and the California Post are regular publications to some people, but they're legit. They have a wide readership, and I got to write a column about the Dodgers, and that was very, very cool. So I enjoyed doing that. And I've gotten some great feedback from a lot of insiders that are associated with Dodger baseball, which was unexpected. And that's very cool too. So, John Park, the vice chairman of the California Republican Party, is telling us that there is a Republican Party in California. Good people are working hard in it. And he's a little bit biased. So, Paul Mitchell says good discussion, which it's not really a discussion, it's a monologue. I also think it's very unlikely 2 reps make the runoff, but made the tool so that there was an objective number attached to just how likely, unlikely. Anyways, let's talk a little bit more about Matt Mahan. So the first thing I wanted to say is my perspective is it starts with this. I am a bit skeptical about people that talk about their solutions for problems when there's not an agreement on what is causing the problem. And so one of the things that you get with Mr. people that espouse I'm the practical politician is they kind of quickly go, yeah, all the things we believe are correct, right? But it's the application of them. It's how we're doing it that is the problem. And so my biggest problem with a Matt Mahan candidacy is that Matt Mahan does not object to big government. Matt Mahan does not object to climate change alarmism. Matt Mahan does not object to violating Second Amendment rights. He certainly does not object to infanticide when it comes to aborting humans in the womb. That's spin, Paul. You could share that with Jody. But so I would say Matt Mahan is a very, very liberal person and fits in the mainstream of a liberal thought when it comes to what should the role of government be in our society. And so what it really turns into is can Matt Mahan wants to basically be more effective at delivering on the visions that Democrats have for California. And so I guess if you want to start out by saying the vision of people who think that less government is better government, individual liberty, individual freedom tied to individual responsibility, that those are all the good things, well, you're not going to get that with Matt Mahan. And so then you almost get into an interesting question of if you're going to have liberal policies being espoused and enacted in California, is California better having them enacted well so that you actually see them come to fruition? Or are you better off, frankly, with kind of a clusterfuckistan situation where the only thing we have going for us is that liberals can't get this straight and can't actually do the things that they say they want to do? Now, I will say this Newsom has presided over so much fraud, so much incompetence that it's almost hard to imagine anybody coming in after him that could do as bad a job as him. The one thing that I think Newsom has going for him is that I think that he's photogenic, telegenic. Look at that spread in Vogue magazine. I think that he does well in an environment where everyone is looking for sound bites and video. And so I think he talks past all of his failures and changes the subject pretty good. But this isn't really about Newsom. This is about Mahan. And I would say that, if you think that let's take homelessness, right? Just use that as a topic, right? Somebody like me, somebody like maybe the Republican candidates would argue that the biggest problem relative to homelessness is that big government is creating a scenario that is creating homeless people. It's creating the homeless problem. And we can get into broader conversations about how when government grows, taxes go up. Suddenly, instead of one person working in a household, 2 people have to work in a household. And so suddenly that has impacts on the family and growing up the family. It also has to do with if somebody's having challenges in their life, right? The first layer of support to help somebody to do that would be their immediate family, their extended family, then their community. Well, to the extent that government is big, government taxes and regulations and fees are big, and they're making everything more expensive, the ability of people to help the people around them is diminished because all of their money is going into the state because the state wants to, I don't know, have high speed rail and the state wants to provide massive healthcare coverage for everybody rather than allowing people to earn their own money and provide for themselves. And then over time, this grows. Anyways, you don't need a right wing monologue from me. The point that I'm trying to make is that when you're not looking at the real causes of homelessness to solve the homelessness problem. Your focus, someone like Matt Mahan is basically saying, look, homelessness is being caused. I don't want to talk about why, but I do want to talk about how to solve it. And the way to solve it is to, I don't know, buy prehab housing and drop it down, but do it efficiently. And let's get more taxes and more money down to the counties because at the local level we can institutionalize people who are mentally ill. He's basically making the case that you should support me because I'm the practical guy that can actually solve all the problems that exist. I know from talking to a number of people that Mahan's in Sacramento today, chatting it up with the business community and trying to make the case that he's the guy they ought to pick. Maybe he is relative to, I mean, who in the hell wants Swalwell in charge or even better, Katie Porter? Who wants these crazy whacked out left wing people in charge of the state of California if you represent the business community? And the answer is you don't, right? So, anyways, my filibuster goes on. And I think we're bumping up against the 40-minute mark that I promised we would do here. So here is my request for those of you who have tuned in. And it's great. There's a bunch of you. Give me your feedback. Don't be afraid to, you can just respond, not necessarily here, but the last email reminder that I sent out, all you got to do is hit reply and say, John, here's what I thought you did well. Here's what I thought went poorly. I won't hold it against you. And then and then share this around. But the number one thing that I need to know from those of you on the phone is this all right? Should I keep doing this? Because I got lots of ways to spend my time to spread the message for what I'm doing. But if you think this live Substack is a good idea, you can hit the heart button and give me love. You can send me an email back. I'm inclined to keep wanting to do this. And then I think that we'll also try to, like I said, I'll give it love at the end of the conversation. But my buddy Mike Madrid, fine human being, by the way, even if he's wrong on a bunch of things, not a bunch, a few, but they're big areas of disagreement between he and I. We agree on more than we disagree. How's that? But Mike has kind of really championed this idea of the Substack interview or going live with more than one person. So we'll try doing that. And with that, Lee Sandwick, who just got on board, one of my loyal readers, we're done. So I'm going to end this and then it's going to end up showing up, I think, tomorrow. I'll email it out. So people that came on late will be able to see what they missed and people that left early can see what they missed. And again, please be forthcoming either by email or text and let me know what I'm doing right and what I'm doing wrong because this is all very new to me. So with that, thanks everybody for participating, and we'll talk to you later. I'll try to find the button on here that tells me, Mike, oh, there's an end button. I was about to ask Mike how to end a conversation. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it.